The new EU ambassador to Australia says Pacific relations will be a focus at the start of her deployment. Caroline Kennedy arrived in Sydney this morning after being appointed to the role by the US Senate in May. She's previously served as the US ambassador to Japan and is also the daughter of former American President John F. Kennedy. The ambassador says Australia and the United States will work together with Pacific partners in the region. And Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jejets joins us now from Canberra. Stephen, g'day. So obviously everyone knows the Kennedy name, but this is a high-profile appointment.
Yeah, it is. Obviously, people are still pretty fixated on the Kennedy legacy, and fair enough, it's a huge part of American and global history. But it is worth remembering Caroline Kennedy is a force in her own right. She's a player within democratic politics, not just on the strength of her name, but also through her own achievements. And she was, as you mentioned in the introduction, the Obama administration's ambassador to Japan, where she built up a pretty credible record. So she is a player in her own right. She's not just a legacy figure, if you like, and the fact that someone of this profile is coming to Australia does signal the fact that the Biden administration places a fairly high priority in the relationship, and I think that's going to play out over the next couple of years.
And obviously China's going to be a big issue. What does she have to say about China?
Well, she wasn't keen to be drawn on China, and I suspect that that was quite deliberate. Caroline Kennedy won't want to be spending all her time in Australia talking only about China. She'll want to focus more on the US-Australia relationship. Inevitably, though, China will touch almost every element of her work here. That's basically unavoidable, simply because China looms so large in the calculations that are being made in both Canberra and in Washington when it comes to strategic policy, the Pacific, climate change, a whole range of different issues. And interestingly, she got quite a few questions this morning on the Pacific, and in particular the recent refocus that the US has had on the Pacific. We saw the US Vice President Kamala Harris at the Pacific Islands Forum just last week making some big announcements about the US ploughing more resources into embassies and into their diplomatic efforts across the region. And Caroline Kennedy acknowledged that the US had actually stepped back from the Pacific over recent years. She said it was glad, or she said she was glad, that it was once again refocusing its efforts, its resources and its attention on the broader region. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
For me personally, it has great significance since my father served in the Pacific and was rescued by 2 Solomon Islanders and an Australian coast watcher. And this is a critical area in the region, and I think the U.S. needs to do more. We're putting our embassies back in, and the Peace Corps is coming, and USAID is coming back, and unfortunately we're coming back. We haven't been there for a while, but I think that that is all tremendously positive. And I think the US and Australia working together will make a big impact.
And Stephen, how long has it been since Australia had a US ambassador actually in Australia, and why has there been a bit of a break?
Look, this hasn't been unusual in recent years. There have typically been quite a few breaks between ambassadors. This time around, it was about a year and a half since Arthur Culverhouse Jr., who was the Trump administration's ambassador, left the country. He left pretty much as soon as the election was over and the results were clear. And then not long after that, of course, we had a charge. Now, I don't want to make it sound like without an ambassador, nothing gets done. Nothing could be further from the truth. The embassy keeps on running as usual. The charge, who's here at the moment, Mike Goldman, has got a good reputation, has got a lot done. But inevitably, the system in the US at the moment seems to get gummed up. And even though this was a very uncontroversial appointment, Caroline Kennedy was endorsed by both sides of politics and was passed through the Senate very easily. The fact is that the wheels seem to turn a bit more slowly when it comes to appointments in Washington these days. So we saw before Arthur Culverhouse Jr. an even longer gap between ambassadors. Still, everyone will be happy that Caroline Kennedy is now in place. The US Embassy will be glad to have that high-level representative with lines directly back to Joe Biden and the White House in place. And Australia also will be relieved to see Caroline Kennedy in the job. She'll start work properly next week.
Okay, Stephen Jejets there in Canberra.